Hi, everyone. Thanks to ALF for this opportunity. It's always, awesome to talk to patients directly. We don't get too many such opportunities. Sometimes a lot of the talks are just amongst physicians. So this is a really great platform. So thanks for the introduction. I'm Renu. I'm at Stanford, and I'll be talking to you today about navigating clinical trials. Before I jump into my talk a little bit about myself. So I'm currently a basic scientist. My lab at Stanford, we focus on immunology in liver cancer. So it's been a great time with all this new immunotherapy drugs coming in for our patients. And my clinical practice is mostly taking care of patients with liver cancer. I've been doing this for the past few years. So I'm really passionate about this research. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to find me, email me. Would love to hear directly from patients. So my talk, there's not a lot of data. I just want to sort of give a broad outline of clinical trials. So I divided into 4 parts. The first section will be a very big overview of what are clinical trials. And then I will jump into how and why you should participate in clinical trials. I'll very briefly highlight some, historic perspective of what's happening in clinical trials for liver cancer. I think my next speaker, Dr. Gretton, will be going into a lot more on the specific drugs and ongoing trials. And then I'll end with some parting thoughts. So let's start with the first section on what are clinical trials. If you look at a definition which can sort of capture the essence of what a clinical trial is, a clinical trial is a controlled research study. It's conducted by your medical team. The goal is usually to evaluate an intervention and to see if we can improve the care and treatment for patients with different conditions like cancer. Some of these words here are important. This is a controlled research study, so we are really controlling several aspects of this, which I will explain more. There is a whole team of medical and pharmacological team that's involved in this. And our big goal here is to ultimately improve the treatment of patients with cancer and, of course, find a cure. I'm a big fan of history. So I look back and see, hey, how did we start all this? How did we come to this definition of this is how we find treatments? This is a story of scurvy. Some of you might have heard of this. It's a very fascinating tale of how this framework was put in place. The picture you see on the left is of the ship, the HMS Salisbury. They were out in the English Channel. They used to sail for days. They were patrolling the channel there. And there was a physician, James Lind, who was assigned to be the physician on this ship in the 1750s. And in those days, with conditions that prevailed, there were many illnesses and diseases that sailors would catch on these long ship journeys. Infections, overcrowding, malnutrition. But there was a particular condition that the sailors were really, scared of. It was called scurvy. And here on the right, you see original, depiction by this physician, Dr. Lind. He wrote down how these sailors were getting oral ulcers, leg blisters, bleeding under the skin, nerve issues in the legs. And he clearly documented, that's the first step, right, to understand the disease. And there were so many factors that could have possibly led to this. So to tease this out, he recruited 12 sailors and he divided them into 6 groups. Each group had obviously 2 sailors. And his hypothesis was this was coming from a deficiency of some kind of acid. So he gave different kinds of acid, including sulfuric acid to one group, to each of these 6 groups. One of the groups just got salt, seawater. One of the groups got ascorbic acid, which is in lemons and oranges. They did not know that it was vitamin C, but they knew it could be ascorbic acid. So two of the sailors got lemons and oranges. I think he did it for like 2 weeks or so, and he saw a dramatic result. Only those 2 sailors who got the oranges and lemons actually completely improved, while all the other 10 sailors did not. So obviously, this was sort of the framework of dividing people into groups, giving different treatments, same time period, comparing them, documenting the improvement. So this is considered the first clinical trial, and this led to sort of the acknowledgement that vitamin C was involved in scurvy. And right now, this is all well-established science. So this was sort of the beginning. This was 1750s. We've come a long way, and there are hundreds of drugs approved, millions of lives saved through this framework of running clinical trials. And I think one of the famous stories, one of the famous personalities that you would have heard of is our president, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was diagnosed with melanoma in 2015. He initially had melanoma long back in 2002, but in 2015, he had melanoma spread to his liver and his brain. At that time, metastatic melanoma was considered pretty uniformly fatal. We didn't have good treatments once the tumor spread to multiple organs. A clinical trial on immunotherapy had just concluded, and so President Carter was offered this option. Apart from radiation, he was given this immunotherapy drug, and in a matter of weeks, when they did a next scan, they saw that his tumors had begun to shrink and completely disappear. As you all know, Jimmy Carter is 98 now. He celebrated his 98th birthday 6 days back. So he's alive and doing well. So this is clearly a miracle story. And I think it was front and center in the public, because President Carter is a well-known public figure. And so this is how far, I mean, this is an example, but there are so many anecdotes and stories and trials. So this is how far I think the field has come. And this, I would say, is a large part thanks to how we conduct and run clinical trials. Now, there are two major types of clinical trials. One is observational and two is interventional. In the observational, they are collecting groups like me who do this kind of research. We collect biological samples, clinical data from patients who have conditions, and we observe them over a period of time to understand the disease better. No intervention here is administered. This is more to understand and help patients in the future. And these kind of observational studies are relatively, risk-free for patients to participate in, and we would love to see more of this in liver cancer. The second is a more traditional clinical trial, which is interventional. There is a test or a therapy that's administered to see if it is safe and effective. And we'll go a little bit into details on what the phases are, what are clinical trials. So how does a clinical trial work? Very broadly, there are 4 phases. Easy to remember, 1, 2, 3, 4. Phase 1 is the first step. This is when a drug or an intervention has been found to be promising from preclinical, as in animal studies. And now we want to test this in human beings. Because this is the first time it's being tested in humans, safety is the focus here. You want to make sure this intervention or drug is safe. So a small number of patients, usually in phase 1, around 15 to 50 patients, they're administered the drug, different doses. We measure the blood test, the different side effects, and we determine if the drug is safe to be studied in larger populations. A lot of drugs do fail at phase 1, around 70% usually are safe enough to move on to phase 2. So once it passes phase 1 and the drug comes to phase 2, now the focus is effectiveness. Does it work? In the case of cancer, does it shrink the tumor? Does it prevent tumor progression? Does it increase survival of the patients? And the focus here, of course, we also look at side effects. This is a little bit larger, around 15 to 100 patients can participate at this phase. And around 33-35% of drugs actually pass from phase 2 to phase 3. So this is a big drop-off point. A lot of drugs that are found safe in preclinical studies and effective may not really work in very complex, human systems. So a lot of drugs get weeded out at this phase. Then comes the phase 3, which is considered the gold standard for approval for any drug. A phase 3 is a very large study, usually multiple centers, a lot of times multiple countries. We're going to compare the new treatment with the existing gold standard treatment. And what we are doing here is we are randomizing patients to receive different kinds of treatment and then comparing them. Hundreds, thousands of patients participate in this. If a drug is found effective in a phase 3 study, then it goes on for FDA evaluation and then FDA approval, hopefully. Once FDA approves the drug and it's out in clinical practice, now you can imagine hundreds of thousands of people could potentially get the drug. So we continue to monitor for long-term effects. That's the phase 4 or post-marketing study. So this is the main, phases of clinical trials. Now, a lot of patients, my patients who see me in clinic, they are like, oh, wow, this sounds like an experiment. So am I a guinea pig? I mean, it's an elephant in the room. We should address it. And I hope I can convince you that it's most definitely not. And the reasons are clinical trials, like I said, are in very controlled circumstances. Usually cancer patients are not getting placebo arms. They're getting the best current standard of care or a new and more effective therapy. So on either arm, they will be getting the best possible treatment that's available. And clinical trials are watched very closely by doctors. You get a lot of attention, a lot of follow-up visits, labs, there's a protocol for this. So you get excellent cancer care when you are part of a trial. And of course, if there are any concerns that the drug is not safe or not working, trials are stopped in the middle. So you don't have to worry that, even if it's not working, they would keep continuing it. And also, it's autonomy. You have the option to leave the trial at any time you want. It's not like you're in this box now, you need to stay. So there's a lot of autonomy, and patients make decisions based on the information they receive. And we've come a long way from the past when there were some, issues with ethics. Right now, we have a very strong ethical framework. There's oversight on clinical trials. So I feel confident that, patient safety is first and foremost in trials. And I don't want anyone to feel like this is just, an experiment that people are conducting on them. This is done in a very, controlled setting. Let's move on to the next section on how to find the clinical trials. The best resource is your doctor. Talk to your doctor, ask them what's available. They might not be aware of every trial in their institution, in their region, but they can definitely refer you to the clinical trial coordinators and team. They have a list of eligibility criteria, a list of trials, and they can talk to you and see which one you might be a good fit for. Ask questions, find out more. There is the NCI has information service helpline. They have a website. You could also go there for more public resources. There are many financial questions. My patients are usually worried. Is everything covered? What about out-of-pocket costs? For the most part, the trial sponsors the drug, the intervention. The insurance companies will sponsor anything that's standard of care. That's like the doctor visit, the imaging, blood test. So usually these are, again, there's a lot of resources to find out more. So if you have questions, you would have to, be more specific to reach out to whoever your trial financial coordinator is. But in general, between the pharmaceutical companies and the institutions and the insurance companies, most of these costs are covered. So I had a few slides on this, but I will make this brief. Clinical trials in liver cancer. I think you've been listening to this since this morning. This is 5-year survival across the board for all cancers, dramatic improvement from 50% to 67% between 1970 and 2013. But as you can see in liver cancer, we still have a long way to go. It's one of the cancers where 5-year survival is still below 25%. And so clearly we need more trials, more participation from all of you. And mortality for HCC is pretty high. If you're diagnosed early, of course, you have surgical options, but those who are diagnosed late, 5-year survival remains low, which is why, again, new drugs are needed. And for systemic therapy, we had this one drug, sorafenib, approved in 2007. Between 2007 and 2017, we had so many drug failures. It was so heartbreaking. So many phase 3 trials were failing. But it's been a blockbuster for the last 5 years. We've had multiple approvals, both immunotherapy and targeted therapy. I think this has been explained to you. But this is all coming out of multiple clinical trials that I've listed under each drug that was approved. And we are hoping that there will be a lot more coming next. What are we thinking? There's a lot of funding here in the liver cancer market size. You can see the market size in terms of millions of dollars invested has progressively increased from 2016 to 2022, especially in the immunotherapy front. So we hope all this will lead to new combination of targeted therapy and immunotherapy, new immunotherapy targets, combination of local therapy with immunotherapy, and also immunotherapy after treatment to prevent recurrence, which is a big problem in liver cancer. So I would like to end with saying behind every new cure are thousands of brave volunteers who participated in these clinical trials. This is a call to action. We want all of you are interested to try to find out more and participate. I leave you with a few resources. This is from the Mayo Clinic website. They have links to several places where you can find studies, how to find studies, how to match resources, and of course, assistance for billing and financial questions.